You don't have to be spiritually awakening to see the gaping great holes in the COVID-19 narrative, to be wondering whether or not the ongoing invasion of Ukraine by Russia is simply the latest in a series of unfortunate but random events, to be concerned by the emerging totalitarian tendencies of so-called liberal democracies around the world, or to be alarmed by the burgeoning cost of living. But a spiritual perspective can certainly give you a wider context within which you can remain forewarned and forearmed, calm and alert in the face of the inconsistency, irrationality and irresponsibility shamelessly shown by the ruling elite, the political, corporate and media triad that currently pulls the power strings on this planet. With the distinct possibility of nuclear warfare looming on the horizon and imminent global catastrophe, you are, if you have given any attention to any of the above and not been entirely trapped in the trance of large-scale mass formation, likely to find yourself in one of two mindsets. Either this could be the end of civilization as we know it, with only a grim dystopian future petering out before you, or these could be the last days, as predicted by the religions and mythologies of many cultures around the world, the survival of which, for the spiritually awakening, will see the start of a brand new paradigm. The Christian version of events, for example, is, from the Christian point of view, a continuation of the Judaic version, which predicts a climactic war at the end of days and the coming of a Messiah who will redeem God's people from captivity and usher in a new heaven and earth. When Jesus, deemed by Christians to be this Messiah, tells his disciples that he will come again, they ask him, "What shall be the sign of thy coming and the end of the world?" He replies that there will be wars and rumours of wars, famines, pestilences and earthquakes. These will be followed by a great tribulation, the desolation of abomination, the like of which has never been seen before, and unless an end is put to this through divine intervention, there will be total destruction of the world as we know it. The spiritually awakened would withstand this through faith in the divine, if they remained watchful and alert, if they stood in the holy place, and were ready to receive Jesus at his second coming. Jesus and the spiritually faithful would then establish the kingdom of heaven on earth. In the Hindu and Buddhist traditions, we find a similar account in the Kala Chakra, or Wheel of Time teachings. According to these, a line of enlightened kings at Shambhala, the mythical spiritual city, would guard its highest and most esoteric teachings until the time came when the forces of materialism were threatening the planet with global destruction. A new king, the Kalki Avatar, also known as Vishnu or Maitreya, would then make his appearance at Shambhala, would call to arms those who aspired to the spiritual way of life, regardless of colour, creed, class, age or gender, and together they would defeat and destroy these evil forces. Typically, he would be riding a white horse. Shambhala would then manifest in all its glory on the physical plane, and Kalki, having brought unity to the world's populations, would establish a golden age. The wisdom of Shambhala would be known to all human beings. Hatred and separation would disappear in the greater light of love. Basic needs would be met without hard labour, and an abundance of health, wealth and wisdom would be the order of the day. Many other religions and mythologies express the concept of a cyclic destruction and renewal of the world. Zoroastrianism, Islam, the first historical civilizations, tribal societies on most continents, and so on. So, are we living in the end times right now? And will divine intervention help us to survive the Great Tribulation and pass through into the new paradigm? Given that human beings, certainly within recorded history, have always failed to create benign societies, it is not surprising that many have thought throughout the centuries, and particularly in time of war, pestilence, famine, or other natural disaster, that they must be living in the end times. So what makes our times any different? Is this just one more difficult period in human history and not quite the end of it? Well, apart from the fact that we have created weapons which literally could destroy the planet several times over, and that we are rapidly polluting the environment to the point of no return, whether we use those weapons or not, virtually all the above traditions, while not telling us the specific day and hour of when the destruction renewal part of the cycle will occur, do give us a close approximation in the form of an astronomical time map. Kalachakra means wheel of time, and in the Kalachakra literature, several wheels within wheels of time are referred to, several astronomical cycles which contain certain transitional points. As with most of the above traditions, there are two cycles in the Kalachakra which have gained prominence, the Yuga cycle and the precession of the equinoxes. In an extreme nutshell, the Yuga cycle, known by other names in other cultures, is a very long cycle which is divided into 4 parts or ages: the gold, silver, bronze and iron. According to the mainstream view, we are currently in the Iron Age, the Kali Yuga, the worst age, where we are furthest away from the divine source, where humanity has reached its lowest point, where virtue and morality have declined, and we are set to be in it for a very long time to come. According to a short count version, however, the calculations of the mainstream version are incorrect, and we will actually be leaving the Kali Yuga and entering the ascending Bronze Age, the Dvapara Yuga, the Age of Energy, around 2025. Although it is thought to be connected to our solar system's orbit around the galactic sun, the Yuga cycle does not readily correspond with any known astronomical cycle. The precession of the equinoxes, on the other hand, does. Without going into great detail, as this has been covered in another Unity Consciousness video, the Astro Wheel of Time, it is a 24 to 26,000 year cycle, where each zodiacal constellation rises in the east at sunrise on the spring equinox for a perfectly predictable period of just over 2,000 years. It is therefore a scientifically verifiable fact that we are currently exiting the Great Age of Pisces and entering the Great Age of Aquarius. When the Mayan calendar was interpreted as predicting the end of the world on the 21st of December 2012, many dismissed it as primitive fantasy, and even more so when the world didn't actually end on that day. But when we realise that there is an 8-year difference between the Mayan calendar and the Gregorian calendar we use today, there have been several calendrical systems over the centuries, and that the Mayan date really corresponds to the 21st of December 2020, which is the actual date for the official astronomical transition into Aquarius, then things look slightly different. Indeed, it becomes clear that the Mayan calendar was not referring to the end of the world as such, but to the end of a great zodiacal age, the age of Pisces. Although it may be surprising, even repugnant or heretical to the Orthodox Christian to attribute an astrological, actually astronomical, dimension to the teachings of Jesus, he does actually refer to his second coming in astrological terms when he instructs his disciples to prepare for the Last Supper, the Holy Supper in Greek, and tells them they will find a man carrying a pitcher of water, the sign of Aquarius, who will lead them to an upper room, the higher level of consciousness that human beings will ascend to in that age. In fact, the whole Bible, Old and New Testaments, are riddled with astronomical timelines and events, and together form what could be described as an astronomical framework in which the evolution of humanity takes place. This is readily identifiable by those who are spiritually awakening and learning to read the scriptures with a fresh understanding. Jesus told his disciples that they must endure the time of the transition, and all the transitional periods between the great ages, Yuga or precessional, are extremely turbulent, by remaining in the holy place. Here, he is not referring to a physical temple, to a material building, but to the soul, to the inner being, which abides in higher consciousness, in Christ consciousness or God consciousness. This was really the good news brought by Jesus. We are not just created by God, not just created in the image and likeness of God, but we are part of God, a holographic expression of God, a cell or atom in the great body of the manifest universe, forever connected to the divine source. And so, divine intervention does not mean that God will renew the world for us. Jesus, the Christ, did not come as some kind of superhero to save the world on our behalf. He came to teach us how to ascend in consciousness so that the divine can work through us too, so that we can manifest the divine on the physical plane, so that we can become divine creators in the image and likeness of our Creator. Jesus will not create the new heaven and earth for us, but will guide us, is guiding us to create the new world, the new paradigm for ourselves. And this we can only do as a collective, as a unity, as one people, as a totality of atoms in the one body of God. If Jesus speaks in a somewhat illusory way about the paradigm shift, although far less so to the spiritually awakening who have eyes to see and ears to hear, the Buddhist Kala Chakra Tantra tends to be a bit more explicit. The esoteric teachings of Shambhala, the mythical spiritual city, would be guarded by a line of sacred kings until the time of the transition from one great age to another, when the forces of materialism, the dark forces, would be desperately holding on to the old paradigm and the illusory power it afforded them, and rapidly destroying planetary life in the process. They would then be revealed by the Kalki avatar, the representative of higher consciousness, to the spiritually faithful, so that they could simultaneously endure the tribulation and build the new world. Basically, the Kala Chakra teachings explain that the human world is a microcosm of the wider macrocosmic universe, and that both are intrinsically connected because they are both rooted in a deeper underlying level of reality. In order to create harmony between the microcosm and the macrocosm, we must access this deeper transcendent level through the practice of meditation. The methods described in the Kala Chakra Tantra involve stilling and purifying the mind, transcending the ego, that is, in order to access this transcendent reality, the source of our being, wherein the archetypal qualities and ideals, such as love and compassion, can be brought into manifest reality in the one meditating. You can become, that is, a receiver, an unimpeded channel or vehicle for spirit to anchor into the earth for all to share. Again, this is explained in more detail in the Kingdom of Heaven videos. Looking at the world today, it is not difficult to see that most of the players in the wars going on around the world, and particularly in Ukraine, where the world's superpowers are poised for imminent engagement, that egos abound, and there is not much sign of transcendent awareness. The story of the prodigal son, a parable told by Jesus to his disciple, aptly illustrates the story of humanity and pinpoints where it is today. The son finds life tedious and restrictive with the father, chooses to go it alone, and taking his inheritance, leaves home. When he fails miserably, having lost everything in wild living, he eventually returns to his father, who welcomes him with open arms. Right now, humanity as a whole, and certainly the ruling elite, are in the process of losing everything as they persist in going it alone, as far away as possible from God. Cut off from their divine source, the spiritual dimension, they have reached the furthest reaches of materialism, where only the ego, the material personality, exists, where the true inner higher being has been completely lost sight of. They have wandered so far away from the divine source that they think the human being is at the apex of consciousness and are completely governed by the lower traits and tendencies, greed, competition, hatred, fears, separation, divisiveness, and so on. They inhabit and promote a society which is overwhelmingly patriarchal, out of balance, because it has forgotten the divine feminine. It is no wonder that we are seeing a growing rise in narcissism, the ultimate ego trip. The lingering pandemic was not really about a virus or a vaccine. When have the ruling elite ever had our best interests at heart? It is most likely, some say, to be a dry run for something more insidious yet to come. Some say that the virus was a smokescreen for the planned Russian invasion of Ukraine, and this in turn was a smokescreen for something else. Since none of this can be proved, and must, for the time being at least, remain in the realm of conspiracy theory, it is probably not helpful to spend too much time thinking along these lines. Perhaps keep an open mind. So what do seem the most likely options for where the world goes from here? Well, one option we can't rule out, which is being mentioned by the mainstream media, is that Putin, followed by other world leaders, will press the button and the bulk of humanity will be obliterated by an all-out nuclear war. Apart, perhaps, from the 1% who are well prepared for such an event, it would seem, with their underground facilities and capacity for space travel. Another option, for which the Russian invasion of Ukraine may or may not have been a smokescreen, is the imposition of a totalitarian system across most of the world, and there are signs that this is already happening, which will carry out a great reset whereby people will have no personal property and will receive their living requirements according to a social credit system. Comply with the system and you do well, oppose the system and you do badly. A third option is that we will all go back to normal, only to suffer the drawn-out demise of a world civilization teetering on the brink of disaster due to its own internal corruption. Life will be increasingly difficult for ordinary people as they struggle with the rising cost of living, the increased scarcity of basic needs, the consequent rise in criminality, the gradual erosion of their legal and human rights, and the looming environmental catastrophe. The fourth option is that an enlightened leader or group will emerge from within the existing system, who will be so charismatic and make so much sense, will replace the good of the I with the good of the we, that everyone will spontaneously adopt an elevated set of values and a rigorous ethical code, and over the course of time, the world will become a better place. Although all things are possible in this universe of ours, there are as yet no signs of enlightened leadership within the present system. It is doubtful whether the system, as it is, would even allow for enlightened leadership. And the clock of self-destruction is ticking. Whatever the next step will bring, it's not looking good for humanity. That is, if you see things purely at the phenomenological level, the level of everyday three-dimensional reality. If you are spiritually awakening and have been following the shenanigans of the Matrix for some time, however, you should not really be surprised at this turn of events. You may be distressed at times, frustrated, even directly impacted, but you will not be surprised. The destruction renewal myths all predicted that things would get very much worse before they got better. So what can you do to endure the transition that we are undeniably going through right now? You can stay alert, awake, consciously evolve yourself, become your highest version of yourself. You can meditate, transcend the ego, and abide in higher consciousness. Align yourself with God consciousness, with universal consciousness, with Christ, Krishna, Buddha consciousness, with the divine source. You can stay in the holy place and live as a soul. Know that you are, in reality, an immortal spiritual being, having a temporary human experience. It is the human part, the three-dimensional material personality, that sees itself as separate from all other beings. The soul knows that the perceived separation into individual human bodies is only temporary. We are, in fact, only a collection of atoms held together and given form, and sustained by the immortal soul, the immortal spiritual being. You, as an individual incarnated personality, are not really real. The soul, which was never born and cannot die, knows that on its own level, all things are completely interconnected. All are part of one greater soul, like waves, in the ocean. The Buddha told us that the perception of separation in the phenomenal world is an illusion because, in reality, everything is interconnected. The idea of permanence in the phenomenal world, he said, was also an illusion. Everything is in a constant state of flux and therefore impermanent, and attachment to or craving for impermanent things is the ultimate cause of human suffering. Separation and permanence are illusions, and it is these illusions that the dark forces of materialism have been exploiting in weaving the trance that the vast majority have succumbed to, in very much the same way that humans were bamboozled by machines in the film The Matrix. What was interesting to witness during the COVID-19 pandemic was the trance-like compliance on the part of the masses around the world with such an outrageously flawed narrative. Psychologists have said this is an example of a phenomenon called large-scale mass formation. The criteria that must be met for mass formation to occur are a general lack of social connectedness and a lack of meaning-making, generalized or free-floating anxiety where there is nothing specific to be anxious about, and a high level of free-floating anger and aggression for which again there is no specific cause. It's probably fair to say that the world has pretty much met those criteria. The cultivation and or exploitation of large-scale mass formation by the ruling elite, largely through the mainstream media, has proved ostensibly to be very successful, and the divisive and persecutory tone of the mainstream narrative has made it risky business to question it, to express an alternative opinion or anything like a nuanced challenge. All such are instantly dismissed as misinformation. It would seem that George Orwell had a crystal ball when he wrote 1984, or could he see what was brewing even then? For those of you who are spiritually awakening, for those with eyes to see and ears to hear, this trance has become all the more apparent, and as you witness world events lining up perfectly with the prophecies of old, you should be seeing this as a sign that we are approaching the final phase of the transition and about to step more fully into the new age as transformed beings. It is especially comforting and reassuring in these troubled times, in the abomination of desolation, to know that the Piscean energy, which largely focused on the individual, the I, is rapidly receding, and the Aquarian energy, which is more about unity and oneness, the we, is rapidly flowing in. And since science is now confirming that everything is energy, something the scriptures knew all along, the question is, which energy do you wish to align with right now? It is important to know what your enemy is doing, to know, for example, that the leaders of our so-called liberal democracies are not much better than the Russian leadership when we take a good, long, honest look at their nefarious dealings. So no, don't take your eye off the ball, off the material matrix, but don't focus too intently in their direction. As world events gather momentum, look neither to right nor left, but stay balanced on the tightrope we are all walking right now in order to get across to the other side. Keeping your eyes too intently on the crumbling paradigm would be like keeping your eyes on the rear-view mirror, when really you need to be looking to the road ahead. Keep moving forward, but see your own connection to world events. See what you are learning from all this. Where do you yourself have the very faults and flaws that you criticize and judge in others? Maybe to a lesser extent than someone who might at any time press the nuclear button, but faults and flaws nonetheless. Where do you live in your ego? What might be lurking in your shadow side that needs rooting out? If you want a peaceful world, look at where you might be at war. Is your ego fighting anyone, a family member, a friend, a neighbour, a colleague, yourself, your soul, God? If you want peace, make peace with yourself and everyone else. Become peace. Try not to succumb to the fear and hatred generated by the ruling elite. It is a foregone conclusion that the planet will emerge from the darkness of materialism into the light of spirituality. By hating them, you are falling into the same illusory trap of separation. of fear, because fear is the root of hatred. We are not here to destroy people, but to dismantle any systems which are no longer fit to express the refreshed flow of life that a new age brings. You should instead send love and light to them, if you have to think of them at all. You never know, a few of them might wake up to the fact that the old individualistic ways are giving way to unity, to solidarity, to brotherhood and sisterhood, to cooperation, sharing, the we rather than the I, the manifestation and cultivation of the higher ideals, values and qualities that are required for a society to live in peace and harmony, and will realise that and use their power and resources to change the world for the better. As creators of our own reality, a fact backed up both by the Bible and quantum physics, in a world seemingly intent on destruction, and mass destruction at that, we should aspire to be like those rebuilding the wall at Jerusalem, who, as described by the biblical prophet Nehemiah, held a building tool in one hand and a weapon in the other. Whilst building the new heaven and earth, cultivating spiritual values and ethical restraint, connecting with divine consciousness, we need to keep our eye on the enemy while the enemy is still around. And lest we fall into the same polarizing trap of duality that characterizes the passing age, let me just clarify that the term enemy is not so much applied to individual people, but to the outworn mindset that is not only destroying the mental, physical and emotional health of millions of people around the world, but is steadily destroying the planet on which we live. All the indications are that we are indeed living in the end times, in a time of transition. But do not forget that as one paradigm is ending, another is beginning, and the sheer volume of people on this planet who are spiritually awakening right now, who are waking up to who they truly are, immortal spiritual beings having a temporary human experience, will bear testimony to that. The times are tough right now, and are likely to get tougher in the immediate future. But you who are awakening and beginning to align with higher consciousness, who want to live a different kind of life on this planet, one that is kinder, more fair, one where we work together collectively as a unity, as one creation, rather than one where power over is deemed the norm, should keep hold of the many lifelines, the many teachings, practices and connections that we are gratefully in receipt of. The new world, heaven on earth, will not happen for us. We must become the citizens worthy of the new world before the new world can manifest. But we are not really alone in this task. Like Nehemiah's builders, we also have help. Our spirit guides, the spiritual hierarchy, the assembly of ascended masters who guide the evolution of humanity from the inner planes, but occasionally incarnating on the physical plane too, are watching over and helping you all along the way, helping you to become co-creators in your own reality, to become who you truly are, to become a citizen of the world you would like to live in. Do not worry, do not fear, stay focused, you are not alone. And if you have listened to the end of this video and have found resonance with it, then you will know that we really are all in this together. So make sure you do your spiritual work and stay tuned into Source at all times. Thank you for listening. One love.